Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of 2025 of Gemini Rising. As always, I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Anne Woolke, and today's guest is somebody that I've been talking about on Highvibe and on the Weekly Oracle Wisdom for the last couple of months as I've been going on my own healing journey. Today's guest is an ex-Navy SEAL. He is, as I've already said, an incredible healer. And I'm not going to go into everything about him because we're going to let him tell us about himself. He is also the author of Free for Life, the book that started it all, at least for me. Christopher Lee Maher, welcome.
Hey, happy to be here. Yeah, it's exciting. Like I was telling you ladies earlier, I went out and actually got a professional mic to be on your show because I respect what you're doing so much.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Anne and I were talking before we got started, and we thought the best way to dive into this before we hear your personal story, what is keeping us from being free in this life? I know it's a loaded question, but...
I mean, you can tackle that from a lot of angles, but if we got down to science, right? Like for me, I look at spirituality as science, meaning it has to be repeatable and it has to be verifiable. And what I mean by repeatable is you can create the same exact result regardless of the person who's applying the strategy. And so after applying these strategies for over 100,000 hours, right, and doing deep, what I call practical research in the moment, I would say the most caustic substance that's in the way of people feeling free is threefold. One, it's their ancestors. Okay. We're in America. In the United States, this is a peasant culture. Most Americans would never want to hear that, but the truth is they're peasants. And what I mean by peasants is the families that came over here hundreds of years ago barely had a pot to piss in, right? They sold that one family heirloom that they had in order to be able to get on a boat that they had no idea was even going to make it across the ocean to get to a land where they had never been, to experience a dream that they've never had, right? So these are high risk takers, right? So America is made up of high risk taking peasants who have an enormous amount of abuse and stress from their ancestors that they picked up. And so that's one phase. The other phase is we have a lot of misinformation, meaning people think that because you're fit, that means you're healthy, right? And so one of the key things in order to be able to get free is you got to get healthy. What do you mean by that? You got to get physically healthy. That means your structure of your body is straight. Your muscles are long, they're flexible, okay? Your mind, your brain is neuroplastic, has a lot of neuroplasticity, and it's nimble and it's open. Okay. Your emotions, to be emotionally healthy, you have to have emotions that are grounded and they've been dealt with and processed from what you've experienced in this life. And then you're going to talk about the person spiritually healthy. You have to have a lot of energy that circulates through your body correctly. So that's phase two, right? And then you have to address the most important thing, the number one cause of being imprisoned in a body without the ability to live the life, create the life, manifest the life that you want, are limiting beliefs. The challenge is the limiting beliefs are developed between womb and 13 years old. At a subconscious level, which is womb to 7, and at an unconscious level, which is 7 to 13. And the reason why I say that is this: children make up things about reality that are false, because between womb and 7, their minds are precognitive, which simply means they do not understand what it is they're actually experiencing and the full impact and the entire context of what's occurring. And so then that child that's observing reality through this precognitive state is doing everything that it can to survive its circumstances. And what it does is it creates a sub-base personality that allows them to be successful at attempting to develop themselves in some way. And then that strategy that they develop becomes their survival-based strategy for life and becomes their winning ticket for being successful. So those are the 3 main things keeping people from experiencing freedom. And if you can be brave enough to address your limiting beliefs, if you can be focused and disciplined enough to straighten your body, to ground your emotions, to circulate and develop high abundance of energy, and to clear your mind. And if you can transmute all of the fears, the limiting beliefs, the insecurities, and the inner deficiencies of your ancestors, you have a fair shot at being able to experience the feeling of freedom on a semi-consistent to a consistent basis.
All right. So your question, or your answer at the very beginning, touched on something that I'm really curious about. So as a historian, I'm really interested in how our past shapes who we are as a society. And it's really interesting what you've talked about in your book and what you just mentioned about how our genetics actually also plays a role in who we are today and who we become. And you talk more about, I think, in the book anyway, about how it limits us in a way. But I also wonder, does it help us also? Because you talked about the majority of us are peasants or come from peasant stock. We came here in this country because we wanted to start another way of life. And so there's something about us, about most of us, where we kept going, right? And it's even in the case of Natalie, her family immigrated from Europe to another place where a lot of immigrants went, which is Australia. And so I just wanted to know, does our genetic makeup work both ways? Does it help us and hinder us? What do you think about that?
I mean, that's a good analysis. And I think it's important to lean on the historical record. And yes, it can help us and it can hurt us. But the most important thing when you look at helping and hurting is when you juxtapose what it is you want to experience in terms of your goals and your achievements, the places you want to visit, the schools you want to go to, all that stuff is wonderful. But if the strong points that you picked up from your ancestors are keeping you from being receptive, then what happens in the end, you might have that stuff, you might have those experiences, you might have that success, but you also have it in a place and in a way that's lonely, because you lack the ability to receive emotions, to receive love, and to receive guidance from others. And so you're on this singular path. And that can be complicated and can be very difficult, because a lot of the people that I work with are highly successful individuals. So they come here and they wake up one day and they realize that, oh my goodness, I'm unhappy. Yeah, but guess what? You have all the stuff, you have all the tools, you've got the discipline, you've got the hard work, you've got the ability to take risk at an emotional level, at a mental level, at a physical level. And yet here you are in these very complex relationships that aren't really working at an interpersonal level, at a professional level, at a romantic level. And so it's most important to look at where am I banging my head against the wall and I'm lacking success. And what that requires is an honest conversation with yourself. And hopefully you have someone in your life that's willing to lean into you and go, hey, Bob, I think you're working against yourself. And then you get to then go, let me defend my position first Let me go away. Let me think about if what they're showing me is true. And if you have people in your life that care about you, that help you show you where the things that you picked up from your family are keeping you from experiencing the things that you really want. And the question is, what are the things that humans really want to experience? And I think it's pretty simple. Humans want to experience an environment of unconditional love. They want to experience peace of mind. They want to have abundant amounts of energy, and they want to have opportunities that allow them to express their emotional passions.
So you're talking about generational trauma and things that are passed down to each of us as we're born. I guess this question sort of layered in that, how many generations back does this go? Does it go all the way back to the beginning of time? Is it a certain number of generations that the trauma gets passed down? And then how much of who we are today is actually us versus what we've been passed down in terms of trauma from the generations prior to us?
I think right now, humanity as a whole is attempting to figure out who it is they are. And this is the first time, in our lives where we've had the opportunity to get education whenever we want it, right? So education is available. When you think about what people had before as opportunities, very few people were offered an opportunity to be educated. And with that education and that information, we're seeing those things change. But typically, when you look at a body is filled with all of your ancestors all the way from the beginning. And if you look at the brain has different aspects of it. And there are some aspects of the brain that they would call the reptilian part of your brain, right? And you have different parts of your brain that are for expanded states of consciousness. And you have your third eye and your pituitary and your pineal gland. Well, all of these different parts of you are constantly evolving, and yet they're all evolving from an original place that they started. So to answer your question, yes, it goes back all the way to the beginning of time. And now we're at a place where we value transformation and we value evolution. And we have people like you and like Anne and like me that are willing to question, that are willing to share what we discover so that others can use this information to take heartfelt action to their own benefit. That was unavailable for my mother. That was unavailable for my grandparents. That was unavailable for my great-grandparents. And now it's available for everyone and anyone who's interested in growth and transformation. So human evolution is getting and taking its very first step at a global level. And this is a very exciting time to be here serving on the planet.
I just want to jump in for a second, Anne, before you ask your next question. This whole thing about generational trauma being passed down, is this recognized in literature, in the scientific world? Is this something that other people recognize, or is this something that's part of the spiritual community?
No, I mean, if you look into epigenetics, so you have genetics and then you had epigenetics. So epigenetics are passed on from seed to egg, okay, and all the experiences that you've had, your father had before he had you, they get passed on to you. And these are markers that allow you to start to shape your personality so that when you come out of the womb, you seem like somebody they know and recognize. Otherwise, you would come out as sort of this unprogrammed being that has no connection to the family that's surrounding you. And so you have to have a way of being able to pass on the generation from before. And that happens through the genetics and the epigenetics. And you can look that up. You can look up Greg Braden's work and all kinds of people who've been studying epigenetics. Anyone can get on the internet and punch in epigenetics and get an entire deep education. I've taken that a little bit further in the sense that when I'm working on someone's body, okay, I'm working on the end result of those epigenetics in terms of the inner deficiencies, the insecurities, the limiting beliefs, and the fears that show up as stress, that show up as tension, that show up as structural, psychological, emotional, energetic, and mental distortion. And the way that that shows up is when I lean my body into their body, my feet into their legs, my hands into their shoulders, they're going to feel pain wherever they have distortion. Well, if we follow this distortion and reverse engineer that, it had to come from somewhere. So the question is, how did it get there? So over this time, I've worked on children as young as 5 years old and people as old as 88 years old, right? And it's always the same exact story, whether they're 7 or they're 88, it's always the same story. What I mean by that is this: the tension and the pain and the discomfort that's in their body is the same at 7 years old as it is at 88 years old. And what that means is that children are coming out of the womb with the tension, with the stress, and with the distortion already in them. And I know this firsthand because I was born severely bow-legged. And then my mother had the doctors break my femurs at mid-thigh and cast me to make my leg straight. So they never removed the tension. They never removed the stress. They never removed where I was holding the distortion. They just broke the legs and twisted the bones and then made my legs look straight. But my tissue underneath, my soft tissue, my fascia and my muscles, they were still extremely short and tight. And so whatever's in your body's in your life, which means whatever's in your life is in your history. And no one can escape the history of their ancestors, because when people are stressed and they're distorted and they're tense, they always lean on their history. And what I mean is the behaviors of their ancestors. How do we behave when we're stressed? We shut down, or we run away, or we fight. We shut down, we run away, or we fight. Well, guess who did this? People who lived on other people's lands that were poor and were underneath the thumb of lords who had land. And they needed to do everything they could to protect their family, even if it went against their own morals, their own values, their own principles, and their own ethics.
So if you're someone today listening to this and you've been dealing with some sort of chronic issue, what would you say is a quick way to diagnose, or is there a way for someone to tap into whatever pain they're feeling right now, whatever their body's holding on to now, and then to sort of do an assessment of what the root cause of that pain is?
Yeah, well, I think the easier thing to do, right, is to point to where the pain is, get out a map of the body in traditional Chinese medicine, and look at what meridian that pain is on. Okay, so let's say your pain is here at the inside of your shoulder, right? You always have pain here. Well, if you go and you look at a map of traditional Chinese medicine and the meridians, you're going to see that this is the lung channel. So now I know there's something going on in my lungs. But what are the lungs about is the question, right? The lungs are about empowerment, right? They're about inspiration and expiration. They're about powering the body. When you plugged in your computer or you plugged in your light to be on this call today, you plugged it into a wall and you got electricity. Well, your body plugs into the oxygen that you breathe. And so we're powered by oxygen that transforms with the fluid in the food that we eat into electromagnetic energy. And so when that electromagnetic energy is deficient, that means it gets stagnant. It doesn't move. It stops moving. And when it stops moving, it coalesces, and then that causes pain. Well, if I push into that spot and I start to massage, and I do that every day for 10 or 15 days in a row, then guess what's going to happen? I'm going to start to feel pleasure here instead of pain. And then what that's going to do is that's going to cause a change in my behavior. So instead of going passive aggressive with my sister, I'm going to decide to communicate a boundary with her. And I'm going to say, listen, if you want to wear my clothes, it's fine, but you need to ask me first. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this pain that sits here, and I'm going to I'm going to see her wearing my jacket, and then she's going to ask me to go to the store with her, and I'm going to ignore her, and I'm not going to go because I'm upset that she took my jacket without asking. Well, she took the jacket without asking because you chose to avoid setting a boundary with her, which is directly affected to the lungs. And so once you understand what behaviors are associated with which channel and which organ in the body, it's very easy to assess how that pain is limiting you or how that pleasure is benefiting you. And I say, whenever you feel good, you do good. Whenever you feel bad, meaning whenever you feel pain and discomfort and tiredness and exhaustion and confusion and a foggy mind, well, guess what you do? You make bad decisions. And those bad decisions, they compound because anyone who's connected to you during that bad decision, they're affected by your bad decision as well. And so, yes, it's easy to lay out a map, look at it, figure out where your pain is and point onto the map where that is, and then to start to change how energy moves through that part of your body.
One of the other things that you talked about at the very beginning of all of this was about getting the body healthy. And had you asked me before we started working together, I would have said, I'm really healthy. I eat really well. We had arguments about some of the foods that I chose to eat. And you sent me to someone to figure out what was going on in my body, as in what organs were larger and smaller and all of this. And it has completely changed my diet, which I have been very resistant to. We're not going to lie about all of this. I have complained a lot of the way through it all. But how is it possible that foods that are deemed healthy can be so bad for me and not for you?
Yeah, that's an easy question to answer. So every human has organs that are same organ, but a different size. And what that means is if an organ's bigger, if my heart's bigger, it gives me a distinct advantage. Okay. But now if it gets too big, then it creates a problem, right? And so when you look at all humans, they have organs that are bigger and they have organs that are smaller. And so when you look at food, the most important thing you have to think about is whether that food generates heat or that food generates cold. And once you start to understand that, size of organs plus whether or not the food in nature is cold, meaning if I go to the desert in Africa and I pick an apple and I bite into it, the apple is not hot. Okay? It's cooling. I eat the apple, I'm cooler, right? But if I go into the jungle or I go into the desert in Africa and we catch an animal and we cook that for dinner and I eat that, that's going to make me warm. Okay. And so certain humans are benefited by cooler foods and other humans are benefited by warmer foods. And people who benefit from cool food, whenever they eat spicy food, their stomach always bloats. And the reason why it bloats is to create more space, right? And so you have to really investigate what's good for you and what's bad for you, meaning what lifts your energy and what reduces your energy. So anytime in my history in the last 25 years, if I've eaten a food and within 10 minutes I feel like laying down, I knew immediately that is not a good food for me. Okay? If I eat a food the next day and it changes my bowels, meaning it makes the bowel too hard or it makes the bowel too soft, I know that's not a good food for me. Like, think about it. Your dog or your cats, those of you who have animals at home, you're not handing them toilet paper, are you? No, because dogs and cats are eating the foods that are correct for them. And then when they don't, you give a dog some chocolate or you give a cat some candy. What happens? It disrupts their bowel. It disrupts their mood. It disrupts everything about them. But what happens for humans is that we've become so accustomed to flavor and taste that we've forgot to consider what the cost and the impact of that is short term and long term. And so if you have an opportunity to meet someone like Dr. Peter Yoon, who has an office in downtown and has an office in Orange County, he will take a drop of your blood and look at your blood. The blood always tells the truth, right? And once you see your blood, it's impossible to unsee that. And I had someone here that came to see me, and when you look at their blood cells, they had 27 in a row that were stuck together, 27 stacks of 27 blood cells, all stacked on top of each other. Okay. No motility at all. White blood cells. And he rates them from 1 to 6 at the size of a 1, right? If you look at her face was bright red. Okay. Stomach, enormous, right? Little skinny legs, little skinny arms, little skinny neck. Okay. But this enormous, literally, she looked like she was having twins. Okay. Well, why is that? That's because she was simply eating the wrong foods for her body. And she was eating good food, right? But they were the wrong foods. And she was eating all the foods on the list that are called double negatives, which means that they're actually poisonous in a sense. So I knew immediately when she came in the door, she needs to see Dr. Yoon. Send me a quick text, boom. She set up an appointment and she went down the list with him, and all the things that were unhealthy for her, which might be healthy for me, she was eating. And all the things that were healthy for her, she was avoiding. And now it's as simple as like get her on the right food and then her body can stop swelling. Because when you eat the wrong foods, you get too hot inside. And then the body needs to create space to deal with the excessive amount of heat that's going on.
So what I know that from reading your book, you talk about how you have a training in Chinese medicine. And I assume Dr. Yoon also is a Chinese practitioner or a practitioner of Chinese medicine. So if someone doesn't live in this area, what type of doctor do they want to look for to get that sort of information?
Yeah, they're looking for an 8 Korean body type diet. So a Korean 8 body type diet practitioner, right? There's Dr. John Karanakis on the East Coast, and his offices are in New York, I think Miami, and Greece. And so they can find him, Dr. John Karanakis. Those are the only 2 practitioners that I know. I feel blessed to have known. And the way that I got to see them is very simple. My ex was very health focused. So the majority of the food was picked up from farmers markets, right? From farm to table. We always lived like that. But there was very little meat. And she was making breakfast and she was making dinner. And I was eating basically a vegetarian lifestyle. And then everything was normal. And then one day I went to the bathroom and I had like these little goat stools, these little green pebbles coming out. And I was like, this is weird. Okay. And then it was the next day and the next day and the next day. And so what I started to do is I thought it was being caused by the amount of meat that I was having. So I started reducing meat. And before I knew it, I was basically, eggs and vegetables, very little meat here and there. And that caused a big problem for me. I end up with hypertension, and I had those little green pebbles for like almost 3 years. I couldn't find anyone to solve it. And then I got an opportunity to go see Dr. Yoon, and I walked in, I handed over my payment. As soon as my bottom hit the chair, he looks at me and he goes, "Oh, you have very big problem. You're lying. You'll eat like cow. Ha ha. Very big problem. Ha 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 ha. And I was like, I didn't even understand what he was saying, right? I had to like, okay, what is he saying? I'm like, oh. And I said, well, what's the solution? He said, you'll need to eat meat 3 times a day. You'll be very big and strong. You'll poo-poo soft like ice cream. And I thought, who have I given this money to? Like, this guy's crazy. Meat's terrible for you. I did all the research. I read everything that they read. It causes colon cancer, blah, 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 blah. So I told my ex, I called her, I said, look, I need you to grab some meat when you go to Whole Foods. She picked up some meat. She brought it home, made a steak. The next day I woke up and my bowels were perfect again. And they've been that way ever since. So for me, what happens is when I eat greens, lettuces, it automatically causes a clogging in my system because I have a very big liver and a very big gallbladder. And what that means is my body produces a massive amount of bile. But if I'm not having animal fats, okay, I'm not exhausting all of the bile that's being held in my gallbladder and my liver's going stagnant. And a big sign in TCM that you have liver stagnation is goat stools. And I'm thinking, well, I'm eating things that are green and the color for the liver is green. This should be working. It wasn't working because I needed to go a step deeper. I needed to find somebody who understood a deeper science about the body than what Chinese medicine provided for me. And I did. And every single person that I've sent to him, their blood has been absolutely horrible. White blood cells that are tiny, almost non-existent. You can hardly even see them on the screen. And red blood cells that are misshapen, that are small, that have very little color to them, have very little motility. And within 3 months, you go back, you see him, he pops your blood back on the screen and your blood is now perfect. And when your blood is good, your organs are good, right? Because that's the juice that supplies everything. And so I would say to anyone who's listening, do everything you can to get your blood right. And if your blood's right, your body can handle a lot of stress. But if your blood's wrong, if it's poorly functioning, it can handle very little stress before you end up with some chronic state of dis-ease or some chronic symptoms that you're in. And the fastest way to do that is to get your food right. Because whatever you put in your body, it's in there for at least, for most people, some people it's in there for 48 to 72 hours. If you're lucky, it's only in there for 12 to 16. But it's in there. And it's just sitting in there causing more issues. So if you're going to take the time to make food, if you're going to take the time to shop for food, if you're going to take the time that it takes to eat food, think about how much time we spend during a week. You might as well be eating the food that's correct for you.
I just need to share that intrinsically as a child, I hated meat. And I would go to bed hungry at 5 years old because I would refuse to eat what was put in front of me. And I kind of love that I was naturally heading towards what my body needed. However, Dr. Yoon has taken away several things that I thoroughly enjoy, and I'm still struggling with it. But when we went in and we had the discussion about, are you a lion or a cow? I was praying that I was a cow because I did not want to be told that I had to eat meat because I didn't know psychologically how I would get around it. I am a cow. I have a very small set of kidneys, very small liver, and very large lungs. But yeah, it's been a journey.
Someone in the chat was asking to write down the type of medicine that you were talking about. But I assume maybe Natalie, you could put.
Yeah, I can put it in. I can put it in the description when we're done.
Okay. Good. So then if you're eating properly, it already takes away a lot of the stress, but we can still hold stress in our tissues, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because guess what? Your blood is making up your tissues. So by the time people get to me, right? If you look at someone's maximal saturation point of stress, 100 is the highest, okay? The average person that I've worked on, whether they're 7 or they're 88, they're at an average of 86 to 87% of their maximal saturation of stress already. So they only have, 13 to 14 left where they can add even more stress into their system. And so their sleep is affected, their communication is affected, their posture is affected, their thought process is affected, their emotions are affected. All of it is affected. And it begins to corrupt and corrode your system. And so the easiest thing to do is to make a little bit of an investment and go see someone who knows more than you do. The thing about me is this. If I find an answer that's better than the one that I have, that'll produce a better result faster and deeper, I will abandon everything that I've learned because I'm into efficiency, right? For me, it's like, well, we have no guarantee that there's going to be the next life, but I know for sure that I have this one right now. And if I profess that I love God and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be alive, I want to maximize that potential. And I know for sure my potential is directly affected by the things that I eat. Now, look, if I'm on vacation, I'm on vacation. If I'm going to go all the way to South Africa, okay, I'm going to test what's on the table because I want to see and feel what it's like to be in that experience. If I go to Hawaii, I'm going to eat outside of how I usually eat because it's about the experience. But when I go home, I'm going to get right back on the pony and put everything back into the place where it should be. And so people have to have a different relationship with their body and their mouth and taste. Taste is important. But function for me is much more important because I know how food and my relationship with food affects my mood, affects my thoughts, affects my energy, affects my body. And I've been gifted with this opportunity to help people grow beyond their own limitations. And people come to me with very complex states of dis-ease and they want a miracle. They literally want a miracle. And so I need to sit down and I need to figure out what's happening. But in order for me to do that, I have to be an embodiment of the product that I'm selling. Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. And it's difficult to sit across from people asking them to take a risk, right? Learn new things, take new actions that will allow them to live a life that they've imagined but have yet to attain.
With the work that you do, when people are coming to see you, they have to go see Dr. Yoon before they ever come in because you want them to figure out their body. And there's obviously the first week of work that they do with you. And through that week, you're doing transmutations, body of light, you're doing the body work, which is incredible. There was a lot of cursing when I was going through it. Ironically, I thought there'd be a lot of tears from me, and there wasn't. There was more anger and curse words than anything else. And then there's a level of work that you have to do after you leave. Mm-hmm. What percentage of people do you see that don't sort of follow up and actually choose to dedicate themselves to the work? Do you get many people, or by the time they get to you and the investment they're making in working with you, do they kind of stick to the program that's laid out in front of them?
Yeah, 99 out of 100 people stick to the program. Right? They check in for 90 days afterwards. They're doing their best exercises, and they're able to recognize the changes because they begin to get unsolicited feedback from strangers. It's one thing for a wife to say, Bob, you look so much better and your mood's much greater and you've got more energy. And I love that we're going away on the weekends and traveling again. We haven't done this in 20 years. So what? But when you go to work, right? And one of the people that works for you in the company comes up and goes, man, you're glowing. There's something very different about you. What is it that you're doing? I'm interested. I know you're doing something special. I've known you for a long time. Now, guess what happens? That really impacts them and it motivates them because it's giving them confirmation that they made the right investment. And now most of them will work even harder. They'll put in more repetitions. And what we're talking about as a listener is we're talking about a program called Bestercise. Bestercise is the long form of what I call BEST, bio, energetic, self, transformational sequences that I teach you that are associated with an organ, with an electromagnetic channel, with a specific form of consciousness, and with a specific kind of intelligence. And so Natalie is in the place where she's working her program, right? You know, she's working on the organs that cause inner deficiency for her. And she's growing beyond the limitations that were handed to her from her ancestors and from her parents. And everyone who's listening, every single person in the world has the same pain in their body. I've worked with the best athletes in the world. We're talking about Olympic champions, right? Silver medalists, world champions, bronze medalists, 4-time NCAA champions, okay, professional football players, basketball players, baseball players. Every single one of them has the same amount of pain that you have in your body because all of it was passed off to them by their ancestors. And so there's no substitute for what we're talking about. You could do yoga and Pilates for 30 years and it won't touch any bit of the pain that's sitting deep down in those soft tissues. Just because you're flexible doesn't mean you get a reprieve from what everybody else is dealing with. There's no green juice you can drink. There's no herbal medication. You can have NAD plus and you can pump exosomes in your body and stem cells. You can do that forever. All that pain is still sitting in there and it's decreasing your ability to maximize your physiological, your structural, your psychological, your emotional and spiritual intelligence and potential. You know, that's a sobering message. I'm sorry if you have to listen to that, but it is absolutely true. I've done the research. No human has done 100,000 hours of research into true transformation at the depth and the level that I have.
I need to say, there were parts of the body work that I was really looking forward to, and I was hassling you. I was like, let's get into it. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. I did not enjoy it so much right in that moment because I had no concept of what was going on within my own body. So that was a whole thing. It was very eye-opening. But talking about all the work that you've done, and all the hours that you've put in, are you able to go back just sort of to the beginning and talk a little bit about just your personal story and how you got on this path?
Sure. Yeah. That would be a pleasure. I was someone who, as a child, I chose to come into the womb of a woman who was quite complex emotionally, right? She had been through her own sets of traumas and she was very fixated on perfection and controlling the environment intensely. And so that was very difficult as a child because I was always on eggshells around my mom because she could flip from Tinkerbell to Godzilla in 0.02 seconds. So then there's no emotional stability, right? So I've got to be very careful on how I present myself because her form of rejection was violence. And what I mean is if she was going to spank me, she was looking for the belt that had metal attached to it, right? She wasn't going to beat me with the leather part. She was going to beat me with the buckle. Okay, so when you have that happen to you as a child, you curate your personality in a way that you're going to express yourself in a way that's acceptable to someone who's highly perfectionistic. Okay, but that had a very difficult, traumatic effect because I was biting my nails. I was chewing my nails by the time I was 5 years old. Okay, I was wetting the bed. Okay. By the time I was 7.5, I was a full blown stammerer by the time I was 8. And I was going to a boarding school where whenever you wet the bed, you had to clean the sheets by hand, and then you had to hang them out on the line where everyone else in the boarding school walking by could see them. So then you have to deal with the guilt and the shame of that, right? And so I think, my first 7 years while my mom was alive were very tough. And that made me emotionally resilient once I got on the other side. So by the time I was 13, I was no longer wet the bed. I was no longer a stammerer, and I was no longer biting my nails. And so because I went to a boarding school that was very universal, meaning everybody got the same clothes, everybody went to the bed at the same time, everybody was required to do the same chores, it gave me the space to be able to process through all of the deep emotional strategies that I had created in order to avoid punishment, rejection, humiliation, discomfort, and violence. And I started to be able to shed those and start to express myself. So by the time I was 15, I was beginning to be fully self-expressed, right? I was getting involved in sports, extracurricular activities. Before that, I was a houseplant, right? While all the other kids wanted to be out playing, I was like, I want to sit down and watch cartoons. And then I started to get out in the world. I started to build a social life. And I remember when I was going to boarding school, I had a buddy of mine named Marcus Riggleman. And we'd always be asking each other, what are you going to do after you leave Milton Hershey School? And I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm going to go to the Olympics. Of course, this is obvious, right? Look at how great I am. Okay. And it was like, I was like, what are you going to do? He's like, I'm going to become a Navy SEAL, and I'm going to be sneaking around and, assassinating people. And I was like, you're crazy, and you need to be put in a psych ward. Like, why would anyone ever want to do that? So fast forward a few years, and Marcus and I went to the same school. We both went to Shippensburg University. And on summer break, went home, and I was helping his mom move homes, all of her furniture and everything she collected over her life into this new house. And then there was a biannual magazine that I came across about SEAL training. As soon as I saw the cover, I knew that was the place for me. It was 7 or 8 boat crews of guys with telephone poles over their shoulders, with green khaki pants on and black boots and white t-shirts, and they were running down the beach. And I was like, these people will challenge me. And within, 6 weeks, I was gone. I was off. I was in the military. And within 2 years, I was in SEAL training. And now, instead of being forced to go to boarding school, me having my personality beat out of me by my mother, I volunteered, right, for imposed discipline. And so at least that made it easier for me to stomach. And I flourished in that sense because I was emotionally resilient from my childhood. I'd gotten over the most difficult things. And so the instructors in SEAL training, they were really kind of easy for me because I had a mom that she brought the heat every day. And so I was used to being yelled at. I was used to being screamed at. I was used to being humiliated. I was used to all of that. So for me, the instructors would be yelling and barking and doing whatever they do, making fun of me. And I would be laughing inside, right? And sometimes I'd have a smirk and they'd be like, well, what's so funny? And I would just be like, nothing, sir. And so I was able to move through that environment pretty easily, except for I continued to keep getting injured and getting what's called full-blown hypothermia because my nervous system was in a state of what's called hypervigilance, which meant I was always on every second of the day. And when you're like that, you're burning through calories constantly. And so the funny thing is, fast forward, as I started to remove this tension and this stress, I went from 1.8% body fat to like 8% body fat in a matter of months. And I had all the physical activity that I had before, but because my nervous system was in a greater state of peace and calm, my body could hold on to body fat. And so what I did is I pushed the envelope. I went through SEAL training, SEAL teams. I got out of that situation, and I decided to go back to college and finish school. And I wanted to train for the Olympic trials. And I found a coach and I found a team and I trained hard. And every 6 weeks to every 3 months, I would end up with another debilitating injury. And then there was the frustration and the tears and the confusion, because here I am, I'm focused, I know what I want. The world has told me that all I need to do is show up and work hard. And it will happen. And it wasn't happening. Okay. I was struggling in multiple directions, meaning I was an insomniac. Okay. I was waking up sometimes 5, 6, 8, 10 times a night to urinate. I had pain at every joint on the left side of my body. I was losing my hearing. I was losing my vision. And eventually I was told that I need a hip replacement. And so all of this is happening, and I'm in my early 30s and late 28, 29 years old when all this stuff starts showing up. And I decide to do something very difficult. And I asked someone for help. And they gave me some help. They brought a yoga mat and a juicer to my house and basically showed me that I was toxic and tense. And once I focused my ambitious mind and my ambitious heart on reducing the tension and reducing the toxicity, my body started to change really quickly. My mind started to change as my body started to change. My emotions were changing as my body was changing. My energy was changing as my emotions were changing. Because when I was 29, 30 years old, and I would go out with some friends, there'd always be someone at the party that would come up and they'd always say this to me: "Man, you are so intense." And I'd be thinking on the inside, I feel like a bunny rabbit. But their interpretation of my energy was super, super intense for them. And shortly after, I started to put a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of energy into reducing the tension, reducing the toxicity, reducing the stress, reducing the distortion. I had strangers coming up to me at like the mall or the grocery store, or the beach, and saying to me things like, "Wow, man, you're like the most peaceful person I've ever met in my life." And I would do a double take, like, what is going on? And then I started to really understand that whatever was in my body was determining what people would feel from me. So the more tense, the more stressed, the more toxic I was, their interpretation of me was intense. When I was clean and open and grounded and flexible and malleable, their interpretation of me was the exact opposite. And I think if you had told me that in my 20s, that would have insulted me. But what happened is it motivated me. So instead of doing that work on myself for like 2, 3 hours a day, I was like, I'm bumping this up to 4. And then a few months later, I'm bumping this up to 5 hours a day. And I worked on myself 5, 6, sometimes 7 hours a day for 7 years to reorientate my body, my brain, my nervous system, and my spirit to be congruent, to be integrated as one being. And from that, I developed a body of work called True Body Intelligence. And I was the original guinea pig for everything that I do to everyone. So I know inside what the effect is. And then I did something very brave. I took 7 years off, which means I stepped away from all the things that I was doing that were bringing me all of this comfort, all of these grounded emotions, all this abundant energy, all the things that were giving me a comfortable body, all the things that were quieting my mind, because I needed to know, does this work? So I put 7 years in. I said, I'm going to take 7 years off, and I didn't do anything. And then I hired one of my buddies from Connecticut who was in medical school. I said, would you be willing to come down to the city and work on me? And he was one of the first people that started working with me. And he said, man, your improvement in the last 7 years is off the charts. And that allowed me to really understand is that when you're working on your body, your brain, and your nervous system, and you're increasing your intelligence, because you're being different in the world, your body can no longer manifest the same type of tension, stress, and distortion. And so I realized then that the changes that I was creating were instantaneous and they were permanent. In fact, they were evolving beyond what I could even understand.
I have a question about your early experience again, because in so much of what you're talking about is getting back to or getting to your true self, right? To getting to a place where you can express who you truly are. And I feel like all of us have things in our lives that come up and are a barrier to our easy expression of that. I'm sorry. So I've got my cat
Juliet.
here who's just decided she needs to lean into me right now. But I find it so interesting in your particular case. This is where there's so much to learn from your experience, because you grew up in the situation where you had, really awful things happen to you as a very young child. And then the remedy for that society thought would help you was this boarding school founded by Milton Hershey, who is the king of taste, developing the American taste, right? All about this industrial 20th century idea of we will properly reform boys, because I think it started as a boys' school, right? And it was orphan boys when it started. That we will properly train these children and apprentice them and teach them a real skill so that they can grow up to do something. And I was reading about their mission. It was learn by doing. And it's so interesting that your book is learn by being, or just being instead of even the learn part. I think it's really interesting. I don't know. Do you think that this other way of being could one day be institutionalized in a way, or put into the way we educate all of the children? Or, can it become something that's part of our greater culture? Because right now we are still operating on this 19th century educational system for kids. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my plans. So the answer is yes. Okay, and then the doing served me until it didn't. Right, meaning as a man, I got to recognize that men become attached to their identity. Right, and their identity is relative to the education that they have and the opportunities that were presented to them, and their ability to take advantage of those opportunities and to produce. And so I've always felt like society was always informing me as a man, you need to learn to provide, you need to learn to protect, and you need to learn to produce. Okay, and if you can provide and you can protect and you can produce, you can make a life for yourself. And the majority of that has something to do with doing. All right. And then I think what happens for men is we run up against the wall in terms of relationship, because women basically can do all the things that a man can do professionally, but no man can do all the things that a woman can do socially. And so now men have been left behind because the feminine has been focused on being, right? Listen, when you go to school, be kind, make sure you look your teacher in the eye, and all the things around being. Smile when you go over. It's your first sleepover at Mrs. Johnson's house. I always ask her at the end of the morning if she needs help in order da-da-da-da-da. And so the mother's there teaching the child how to be, right? And the father's job is to teach the child how to do. And so I think what's going to happen over time is women are going to penetrate into greater positions of leadership. And then we're going to start to see this enormous shift towards being, right? Are you being kind? Are you being open? Are you being empowered? Are you being generous? Are you being transparent? Are you being passionate? Are you being loving? And the focus is going to be on our being, because every single day in the world, the percentage of millionaires, meaning people who have access to resources, is growing enormously. And people who have resources have the ability to then focus on their being, because doing has taken them so far. But now the excessive doing is causing a massive amount of tension, stress, and distortion that they can no longer live with. And so they're looking for answers. And so I am here on this planet in this time to provide tools that allow you to take actionable steps towards decreasing your false self-esteem from doing and to develop true self-esteem from being, right? Being loving, being peaceful, being transformative, being forgiving, being empowered, being generous. All those states of being are soon going to be the focus. Consciousness is going to be the new gold, because once we move to blockchain as a main form of exchange of currency, now people have time in their day to do what? They have time in their day to sit back and start to question, who am I? Why am I here? What do I really be doing? Do I need to be doing this job? Do I really need the money? No, I don't actually need the money. So what would I really focus my time on? Oh, now I have time to focus on being. And so as the world begins to change and more money and more leadership gets into female hands, the direction of the world is going to change. And it's already been happening, right? In 2000, when I was in school in 1986, and I was studying economics, 2% of the managerial positions in the United States were held by women. In 2012, 51% of the managerial positions were held by women. Right? So the harmonic convergence began in 1986. Okay? We hit the midway of that harmonic convergence in 2012. Then the energy started slowing down. Well, we had already reached that point in 2012, 51%. So now it's just a matter of getting female principles, feminine principles into the educational systems and into the workplaces. And once that starts to penetrate deep, men are going to be able to have an opportunity to start focusing on different things, right? Because whoever holds the purse strings controls the direction of what we value. And so we need to get more money and more leadership positions in women's hands. Now, part of why I'm here is to take all of this information that I've been gathering and make it available publicly so that other people can benefit and they can shift out of doing into being in the privacy of their own home. The thing that I love that I do is you don't have to go anywhere. All my best exercises, I can do them at home. I never need to go to the gym. And my body's strong, it's flexible, it's fast, and it's healthy. And I only need to put in about 15 to 20 minutes a day. I feel better, I look better, and I'm focused on the things that bring me more joy. And that feels good. And I want every human to be able to have an opportunity to experience that in the next 100 years.
I want to go off in 10 different directions, but I
Okay.
will say you are expanding what you're doing, because you actually do teach people to become practitioners. So that is already starting. As far as the feminine or the divine feminine sort of taking control of the world and it altering things, numerologically, we're in the 2000s, and especially now that we're in the 2020s, that's all feminine energy. So all of that sort of lines up with exactly what you're saying. But what I do want to ask you, so having been through your program and knowing how it works, I'm curious as to your thoughts on talk therapy. So for people that aren't able to access you or another practitioner at this moment in time, or people that maybe aren't ready yet, what are your thoughts on talk therapy? Because while there's a certain amount of discussion with you as to what traumas are and what goals people want to reach and things that are going on in their lives generally, that's not the basis for the work that you do. It's very different. And anyone that's been watching me for any amount of time knows that I did 5 years of very intense talk therapy, which I found very helpful. I know it shifted who I was as a person, and I fully believe that it's what got me to this point in my life and in the world where I was able to access you. But I'm curious as to your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for you is this is and I'll keep that stuff private, but you now are moving towards having a body that matches your mind. Okay, most humans, they don't have a body that matches their mind, right? And so if you look at the mind as being conscious and you look at the emotions as being unconscious, meaning the breath, and you look at the body as movement, position, and instinct, and you look at the spirit as a circulation of consciousness, well, then you realize, well, the importance is to be able to get all of those working at basic efficiency, right? And so talk therapy is wonderful for the mind, okay? But talk therapy will never be a substitute for the removal of tension and stress and distortion. And you're going to need to continue to keep talking until you remove that distortion. And the beautiful thing about the mind is it can help us manage our lives. But what happens when our mind gets tired? What happens when our body gets tired? You revert back to old behaviors. And so the question is, where do the behaviors lie? Do they lie in the body or do they rely in the mind? Well, if you look in terms of Eastern thought, they would inform you that the consciousness actually comes from the organ. The brain's job is very specific. Its job is to govern the amount of electricity that goes to every single organ in the body. And so its job is to govern. That's it. Okay, hey, there's something going on over here in my spleen. Why don't we move that over here and send in the troops to solve that, right? So can talk therapy be an absolute solution for a trauma state? And the answer is absolutely not. It's absolute zero, okay? What it can be is it can be a very great long-term Band-Aid until you decide to get into your body and start removing all of the pain that was created from the trauma in the first place. And so a lot of people come to me in the past, let's say 10 years, have had addiction issues, whether it's heroin, whether it's Molly, whether it's opioids, like a lot of really intense stuff. And what they fail to realize is that simply because you stop using the drug, okay, that doesn't mean you've healed the damage that you've already created. Right? So if you've been doing drugs, whether it's sugar, nicotine, caffeine, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, if you've been doing those for 25 or 30 years, simply because you get off of them, that doesn't mean you're healed. That just means you stop damaging yourself. But what about all the stuff that's been left over and has ravaged the insides of your body, has reduced the function of your organs systemically, has reduced the function of your thought process mentally, has reduced the function of your breathing emotionally, has reduced the function of your spirit energetically? You have to then go, okay, I stopped doing the things that were damaging. Now I need to go in and I have to address the root cause, and the root cause is buried in your body. And the question is why? And here's the reason. Your body, your nervous system is like a camera, and it's taking, millions of snapshots every day based on everything that you're doing, everything that you're interpreting, the way that you're breathing, the way that you're sitting. It's constantly gathering information and it's storing it. And the question is, where does it store it? Well, it stores it in the body, the brain, and the nervous system. And so talk therapy is great to have an understanding of, well, how did I get from A to Z? Well, if I can understand that the reason why my mom was so obsessive about me wearing underwear at all times is because she was sexually traumatized, well, then I can get into a state of mental forgiveness. But for those times that she beat me with a belt buckle because I didn't have underwear on in the swimming pool underneath my bathing suit, I can't take those lumps out of my body with talk therapy. And so any trauma that's physical, any trauma that's sexual, any trauma that's psychological, any trauma that's energetic, you need to deal with that trauma at the level of where it sits. For some people, it sits in your energy field. That's called your auric field. Some people, it sits in their body. Some people, it sits in their breath. Some people, it sits in their mind. Talk therapy is great for the people dealing with things that sit in their mind. It's terrible for dealing with the things that sit in your body. And it would be arrogant to think that you could talk your way out of physical trauma. Now, is it beneficial? Sure. Right? Anything that you hold in builds pressure and creates excessive heat. So you want to be able to have somebody that you can sit down and you can talk with. And even if you haven't had trauma or anything that was distorting you, it's beneficial to have someone to talk to just about your dailies. And that's why coaching is a niche that's grown so much over the last 15 years, because people have somebody they can talk to who can help them look at their inner deficiencies and their insecurities, and to be able to get them to take a risk in the place where they're shut down. And so I would say talk therapy, like all things, has its limitations, but also has its benefits. And if someone feels called to go into talk therapy, great. Find somebody that you trust, that makes you feel comfortable, that's willing to question the way in which you do things and provide a safe space for you to share. That's great. I think everyone should have an hour of that a week. That's alive. The world would be a better place if that happened. But if you think that talk therapy is going to be an absolute answer for any deep physical traumas that you've gone through, you're living in a fantasy.
Would the ideal situation be to do both a physical manipulation along with the talk therapy, even at the same time?
1000%, at least within the same week, right? At least within the same month. Because as you start to remove these traumas that sit down at the, let's say, genetic and epigenetic level, they're going to be experiencing things they never experienced before. And they need someone to talk to about it, to at least get an understanding, or at least just to offload what's coming up. Because some people go through the 5-day and then afterwards, their anger, their anger comes like straight up to the top. And then they're going to start projecting on their kids. They're going to start projecting on their wife. And I tell them, look, when you go home, tell your wife to give you like a couple weeks to like shed some of this stuff, because you're probably going to say some things that might be out of character and feel hurtful to her or the kids. So inform to let them know that daddy's probably going to blurt out some stuff and you're going to see me behave and react in a way that you haven't seen before. And I think guidance is good.
I just want to put this into perspective for some of our viewers as someone that's gone through your therapy. We had a very long discussion before we started, and I brought up all the points that I thought were pertinent that we would be working on sort of freeing me from, and other things came up which I hadn't thought of as any of the major issues. And as far as the anger, I was an angry woman for a few weeks, and I don't think I said anything horrible, but I wanted to murder people. There's no other way to phrase it, but it kind of just passes. It just has to sort of come out and go through you, and it's so fascinating. I've always been somebody that enjoys psychological things. I read a lot of books on serial killers and things like that, and it's because I'm trying to understand the psychology behind why, because my brain's not wired that way. And going into this experience and having a thought process of what I expected to go through an experience and the outcome, and then actually going through it and having it be different, not in a bad way, just different to what my perception was going into it. Fascinating. But there's another level to your work which plays a very important role from your point of view, and this is one of our favorite topics on Gemini Rising, is human design. You place a lot of importance on understanding your own human design as well as the human design of your children and the people around you. And I just want you to expand on that. And then I do have a question a little bit later on.
Yeah, I got introduced to human design in September 2008. And it was by a guy that was one of Ra Uru's students. And fast forward 3 months, and I was at an event where the person who hired me to be at the event was a 1-3 profile, which means the 1-3 are the only ones that are purely self-absorbed. Okay. And I remember sitting at the top of the steps and listening to her and watching everyone surrounded around her. And I caught myself like judging her. I was like, she's so narcissistic. I can't believe these people are here listening to these silly little stories. Like, let's actually get some real work in. This is nonsense. Right. So I completely disengaged from the group. I was judging her. And then I decided to look up her human design. And then once I understood that she was a 1-3 profile, and the way that she allows people to grow beyond their limitations is by inviting them into her story and her sharing all of her mistakes that she learned along the way. And then I stood corrected. So after that, I was like, oh, she's actually not narcissistic. She's self-absorbed and self-focused. This is how she's designed to be. And I think the most important thing about human design is that we come up with harsh or cold or sharp or limiting projections about how people are being, because they're being different than how we are being. And I think the thing that I love most about human design is it gives me an understanding of how this person is actually designed to function. And then when I see a purely self-absorbed 1-3 manifester, ego-driven, soaking up all the energy in the room, I get excited because I know they're operating correctly. Where before I would be offended by the way that they're functioning because I'm a 5-1 profile, which is truly transpersonal, right? So that's on the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And I think human design helped me realize and understand that in order for me to be successful in the world, I'm going to have to learn to be personal, which means I'm going to have to invite people into my story. And part of my process and practice for doing that was getting on podcasts and sharing stuff about my history, right? And as a 5-1, we are very contained, okay? We are here to have 4 or 5 people that are really close to us. And if a new person comes in that's close, a person who was close, they exit, right? We can manage about 4 or 5 relationships at an interpersonal level. And so in a certain way, that was intimidating for me. Now, remember, I was in boarding school. I was in the military. I was in college. I was on a lot of sports teams. So I was severely socialized. So I know how to be social. All right. I know how to connect. I know how to relate. Well, what human design gave me, it gave me the permission to be myself and no longer care about what other people thought about me. And it gave me permission to understand and recognize and value the uniqueness of everyone's design. And that's helped me build my business. It's helped me build my practice because I build it based on my design. And it works. It works so well. Because what I say to people is this: nothing trumps design. And when you're being yourself, it's super easy for you to attain success. But when you're being your curated, negatively conditioned personality that you picked up from your parents, then it's very difficult to be successful at any one thing, mostly figuring out who it is you are. And so where people are around me, I let them be themselves because I give myself the right to be myself. And human design is essential. So let's say someone comes in and they're a manifester and they're a 4-6 profile and they're emotionally defined. I know when I start investigating them, because they're retroactive in their thought process. And what that means for the listeners is this: everyone that's emotionally defined needs a minimum of 24 hours to sleep on the question that you've asked them, because their mind is retroactive, which means once you ask them the question, they're going to go on an emotional wave and they're going to dig into and fall into feelings that bring up information for them. And they need to be given space to do that. Where what would happen before human design, I would start asking questions, meaning I'm a 5-1 profile. I'm a heretical investigator. I would ask questions and people would never give me clear answers. And I would start getting frustrated. And now, as soon as I ask someone a question and there's even like a bit of a pause, I can already tell they're emotionally defined. And so I go, hey, this question, let's talk about it tomorrow. At least you get to sleep on it. And of course, the next day, they would have all the clarity in the world around that question I was asking. And well, guess what? 50% of the people on the planet are emotionally defined. And there's a lot of parents that are there that ask their kids questions and the child hesitates and they assume the child is lying. And if they just did their human design, they would find out that the child is emotionally defined and they need to give that child space in order to answer that question from a state of feeling. Well, if I'm with a manifester, I know that the manifester is going to want to initiate things that are going on during that 5 days. I know the generator is going to sit back to respond. I know the projector is going to wait for the invitation. Like today, I was interviewing a guy who I want to work with, who's a fabulous guitar player. His name's Jordan Ziff, and he plays for the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, right? Like phenomenal, but I know he's a projector. And so at some point during our engagement, I said, I want to invite you to come on to help me produce my next album and to finish and complete this album. As soon as I said that, a huge smile came across his face because he's a projector and he got what he wanted. He got the invitation. Right. And so when you understand who's in your field, what their type is, what their profile is, you can pull back all of your assumptions and you can start to work with them based on their design. And now we're relating at a design level, which means we're relating at a solar level. OK, not an individual, religious, spiritual level. We're relating at a solar level because when you look at the human design, it has two main phases. It has the personality and it has the design. The personality is developed the moment the child comes out of the womb. The design is turned on in the codons inside of your cells inside the genes, there's a thing called a codon, and the codon turns on your design at 6 months of gestation. And so you look at that and you go, wow, oh my goodness. You mean I have my design and I have my personality. My design is who I'm being that I can't see. My personality is what I'm aware about how I'm being. And I love human design because it gives me a clear understanding of who I am as a design, as an incarnate soul, and who I am as a physical personality, because your design never changes. Your design is your design from life to life. Okay? But your personality is who I get to be in this lifetime in terms of a life experience. Do I get to be a manifester? Do I get to be a projector? And so you need your design in order to fulfill your purpose. Without the right design, there's no way for you to fulfill that purpose. And once you start understanding design and you understand the intricacy and the amount of effort that it took to go in and build a human body this way from a genetic and an epigenetic level, from a spiritual level, from a light level, you start to have so much more appreciation for the divine, universal, supreme, prime creator, the creator of all that is. And you understand that there's so many things at play. And for me, it helps me to confirm the importance of every single life in my life. Every bird, every ant, everything plays a very specific role, and so does your design. And I think it's most important, if you're going to be a parent, the responsible thing to do is to understand your child's design, so you don't force feed him or her your personality and your inner deficiencies, and give this child the space to be fully self-expressed. And the world will become a better place. And it's because of people like you. It's because of Gemini rising. It's because of, David and all the other people that are in this industry that are getting this quality of information out there. Because once you understand who it is you are, it's very easy to set boundaries with other people who want to run over you and sell you their version of their brand of how you're supposed to do things. And when you know your design, it's very easy to put up your hand and go, hey, that works for you. That works against me. How about we figure out another way to do it where I can be included in this experiment that we're in?
So you said again, the first number is your design, and the second number is your personality. Is it?
Yeah, personality and then design. So I'm designed as a heretic. So my personality is heretical, meaning that I can see when I'm being heretical. Okay. It's obvious to me.
Mm-hmm.
All right. People see that in my personality, right? People would always say to me, oh man, he's a free bird. They would always say that to me. He's a free bird. And they'd ask my other friends, where's Maher? And they'd say, I don't know. He's a free bird. When what they meant is he's heretical. He's going wherever he chooses to go, regardless of what the acceptable norms are. All right. My design is I'm an investigator. If you go back and you ask all of my teachers, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, they'll tell you he was killing me with questions. He was killing me with questions because I was always investigating. But I didn't think about that part of myself. And I was always surprised when I would go back to boarding school and I'd have a teacher pull me inside, go, no one's ever asked me more questions than you. And I'd be like, what's he talking about? But then as I started to understand human design more and I started reflecting on those conversations and those visits, I was like, oh yeah. So your design is running at a subconscious level. Okay. Your personality is running at a conscious and unconscious level, which is very different states of being, very different states of function. And so once you know that and you have that information, like if you're a 4/6, you know that, oh my God, that's just my personality. But who I am deep down is down at the bone level. I'm a role model. Okay.
So
And you're what?
If you happen to be a 1-3,
Okay.
do I worry about people thinking I'm arrogant or whatever it is? But I'm a generator, so I assume, I don't know, I'm in the background being my self-absorbed.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that's great about 1-3s is they have deep levels of insecurity, right? So you're always going to be worried about what people think about you, right? So whenever my ex would get dressed, she'd always come over and go, "How do I look?" And I'd be like, "You look great." "No, really? How do I look?" I'd be like, "You look great." "No, no, no, really. Just tell me the truth. I don't want to walk out the door looking." I'm like, "You look great." Okay. That never happens for me. I think I look great in everything. Okay. Okay. I think I look great in like a pair of ripped pajamas. And she got to pull me aside like, "Dude, you got rips in your pajamas. Don't wear those." Okay. So the 1-3 is deeply insecure, but simultaneously the greatest risk taker. Like that's their juxtaposition. Deeply insecure and a great risk taker. Think about that. That's a crazy, wild ride to have for, let's say, you live 80 years and that's your life experience. Insecure while taking big risk. You would think the person who was insecure would be risk averse, and it's the exact opposite. That's why I love the profiles and putting together and the juxtaposition that every single one has.
I need to say, Anne, as one of your best friends, yes, I'm giving myself that title. I figure we speak every day, multiple times a day. So yes, you are the furthest thing from being self-absorbed than I've ever met. But I do think that understanding other people's profiles and how to interact with them, as well as understanding your own, it becomes like a superpower because it helps you understand how to ask the questions of the people that you need something from, especially if the way you've been asking questions isn't working anymore or has never worked in terms of getting a response that is productive and able to move things forward. So the question I have about human design for you, Christopher, is this. Everyone that talks about human design talks about 2027. Things are shifting and things are changing. You are the only person that has ever given me an answer that actually made me understand what is shifting in 2027. So if you could explain to all of our viewers what it is that's shifting in terms of human design in 2027.
Okay, and so the thing we need to understand is when we say that things are shifting, the shifting is gradual, right? And so the shifting has already been in place. Like think about when PayPal first hit the market. It meant that you no longer had to transact through a bank. Okay, so that was one of the first major steps, right? Think about when YouTube got started and it became YouTube University, where people were putting free content and education available for anyone who wanted to watch and or listen, right? So if we go back and we look at the start of those companies, that was the beginning of this, right? But in 2027, we're shifting out of being what's called a quad left, which is active, focused structure, to passive structures. Okay. And when we look at the banking system or the educational system or the governmental systems, they are already in the process of shifting and changing. Well, Trump became president, and with Elon Musk, they've already began to enact this plan to do what? To change the amount of people who even work for the government, right? Well, all of that is leading towards a more passive, open system where individuals get to govern themselves. Okay? You no longer need to go to a university to get an education to be successful. There's tons of people today that are going to YouTube and Instagram and all these other platforms that are allowing them to gather information in a way and to consume content in a way that would be abnormal to the way that we consumed content 15 years ago. And so in 2027, what's really great is we're going to be in what's called a quad right strategy, which means the digestion is passive, the perspective is passive, all four arrows are turned to the right. And so we're going to be more uncomfortable with the unknown, where before everything needed to be planned out and structured. So we're losing our commitment and our connection to structure and being more okay with making decisions about everything in the moment. Like basically someone's going to wake up, a wife's going to wake up or dad's going to wake up and be like, hey, grab the kids, pack the bags. We're going to Hawaii for a week. What are you talking about? That's what we're doing today. Huh? What do you mean that's what we're doing? And so the universe, the solar system, our planet, all the beings are going to be much more comfortable with in the moment decisions and being unstructured. And that's going to be great because it's going to create more evolution, because humans are going to feel comfortable governing themselves outside of structure.
Makes me question how all the Virgos will go. They're a very structured people.
Well, the systems that are in place, they'll have no choice. Like, as we know, the way that we do banking and how all that's going, it's already changed. Okay? That's never going back to the way that it was. Okay? The way that we used to educate, that's already changed. There's no way to go back from that. The way that governments are governing is changing. There's no way to go back to that. And there's going to be less regulations around everything. And there's going to be much more self-governance, which I think is going to be really wonderful, because that sets the stage for us to shift out of doing to get our self-esteem and to shift into being to get our self-esteem. Because in the future, if you're not kind, if you're unkind and you're unloving and you're rigid and stiff, you're going to get less invitations, because the focus is going to be on the internal growth. See, when I wake up in the morning and I don't know where I'm going, I have to have internal growth in order to be able to handle living in a world where the unknown is the status quo. For all the people that could wake up in the morning and the known was the status quo, they never had to build inner self-esteem. They could rely on doing and outer self-esteem. And that carpet is getting ready to be absolutely pulled from underneath their feet. And you've got to be okay with the unknown. And I started practicing this with myself really strongly in the last 7 years, where if I needed to go somewhere, I would book my ticket right before I got on the plane. My friends say, man, you're paying 2-3 times as much for the ticket. I said, I don't care. What I want to do is I want to practice being absolutely in the moment and in the unknown. What's going to occur today? I don't know. I have a sense of what might occur, but I haven't taken any actionable steps until it's necessary, because things could change. And in all the times that I went against that, every time the plans would change, and then I'd have to backtrack and book another flight. And finally, I started to understand, like, whoa, this quad right thing is actually really shifting. It happens to be that I am a quad right. Okay, so the planet is really being set up for people that have more arrows to the right to be more successful. The people who are going to really struggle are the quad lefts. and the people that have 3 hours that turn to the left. The ones that have 2 to the left or 2 to the right, they're already used to that. They're fine. But it's going to be people that are on the extremes, 3 hours to the left or 4 hours to the left, that are going to struggle emotionally, especially within the first 5 to 10 years.
I think that a Virgo is mutable, Natalie, so they will be able to handle it. But I guess it depends on your design as well. So I know I have a completely different question. Should I ask it, Natalie?
Go for it.
Okay, so in your book, you talk about working with athletes, and you yourself was a very high-level athlete, and you still, I'm sure you still are. And when you started the work when you started yoga and some of that softer sort of exercise, you really had a lot of stress in your muscles to work through. And you talked about how so many athletes have that stress. And then in the book, you talk about Michael Jordan in particular, and how sometimes you look at these high-level athletes, and as soon as they're out of the context of the stress of probably having to perform so much, they can not be as physically fit, or that they quickly revert to something else. And you mentioned that if we all or if athletes were maybe better in touch with their feelings, or I'm not sure what it is, that they'd be able to last longer into their late 40s, I think you mentioned.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
well, I was just going to say, so my question is, and I know you're an Eagles fan, so maybe I shouldn't bring this person up, but what explains someone like Tom Brady, who was able to extend his career for so long at a very high level of success?
Sure. And I mean, to be honest with you, Tom could have kept playing if he wanted to. Would he have been like on the most successful team? No, but he would have went to the playoffs, would have done really well, because the human body isn't ready to peak until it hits about 48 years old. And that's for athletes as well. But the challenge is that the way that those training systems are run for these athletes, whether they're NCAA Division 1, 2, or 3, or they're semi-pro athletes, or they're professional basketball players, soccer players, football players, and baseball players, right? The story is always the same. Their body starts to absorb more tension and stress than it can get rid of in a 24-hour period. Okay, so when you have youth on your side, you need very little sleep because you have all these youth-based hormones that are running through your body that are repairing you very quickly. Once you get into your late 20s, now you have a reduction of production of those youthful hormones, and your microbiome, its efficiency has decreased. And so now your body's naturally starting to hold on to more fluids. The body's getting more toxic. The muscles are getting more tense. The fascia is getting more constricted. And the sleep is becoming less efficient. And so now what happens is Monday's stress, a little bit of it, let's say 10% of Monday's stress is now leaking into Tuesday. And now 10% of Tuesday and Monday is leaking into Wednesday. And do that for 4 or 5 years, and then suddenly a guy is running off the sidelines to engage in a physical activity, and he tears his hamstring, or he tears his MCL or his ACL. And all of those athletes and all of those coaches and all those trainers make a very big mistake. They think that what they did in that moment is what caused that event, and it's not. That event is the result of decades of unresolved stress, unresolved tension, unresolved toxicity, unresolved structural distortion that will eventually end their careers. Now, Tom was fortunate, and LeBron, okay, so if we talk about both of them have been working with two different guys that have them focused in a completely different way. LeBron James trains with a former U.S. Navy SEAL, okay, in these very specific types of exercises. And Tom Brady has worked with this body worker that's helped him to constantly reduce tension and stress out of his system, okay? Now, if we look at athletes in longevity, those two are the most successful by far. Every quarterback in the NFL that's playing right now, like a Matthew Stafford that plays for the Los Angeles Rams, okay? He could play another 10 years if he wanted to, but his body has absorbed so much trauma, okay? His body's telling him to walk away before he has a really big injury. Now, if you remove the tension, stress, and distortion that's in the structural body, where they're absorbing this constant amount of strain, then guess what happens? Their body returns to its youthful self. So if you had a year working on Matthew Stafford, his body would operate as a 22-year-old's, because you could reduce 50% of that stress load within 5 days. Literally within 5 days. All the athletes that I work with at Penn State University, world champions, Olympic champions, silver medalists at the Olympics, silver medalists at the World Championship, bronze medalists at the Olympics, 4-time national champions, 3-time national champions, 2-time national champions, all of them will tell you that the work that I've done on them has benefited them greatly. And if they want to keep wrestling and they want to stay in that sport for a very long time, they can if they choose to do so. And Penn State outperforms every other athletic program in the United States, regardless of the sport.
Wow.
Okay? And look, the coach was already an excellent coach, right? Okay? The team was already winning, all right? But they were winning national championships by 7, 8, 13, and like 30 points. They win national championships by 100 points. If they cut their team in half this year, cut the team in half, one half will get first place, the other half would get second place.
Wow.
That's how prolific they are. But they're that prolific because I've taught them how to reduce their tension, their stress, their toxicity. And I go and I see them, 5, 6 times a year and get them back on point. And I'm getting their brains working electrically. I'm getting their emotional bodies turned on, so their relationships are functioning correctly. And they're removing all the tension and stress out of their physical bodies, right? Penn State, since I've been there in the last 6 years, have only had one season-ending injury for a starter. And the only reason why that happened to that person is because I don't work with that person. That's the only person in the program that I don't work with, because they work with someone else.
Wow. And I'll bet it's great for their learning as well, or for their success in terms of academics.
Oh, for sure. Yep. Yep. They're doing well across the board. By the time most of these guys are 24, 25 years old, they're married, they own a home, right? They've had the success that they wanted physically, and they had the success that they wanted academically.
I wish some of my favorite tennis players had discovered you and stayed in the game, because I was always sad when my favorite tennis players decided it was time to retire, because their bodies were just it was injury after injury. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. So Anne and I like to finish every episode asking people the same 4 questions, just to get a sense of who they are. So question number 1, what makes you laugh?
Questions like this. But honestly, what makes me laugh? I'm a person who, I laugh internally a lot, which means I'm not laughing externally, but I find a lot of things funny. But the thing that makes me laugh the most is people who are silly, right? People who are more free, people who are like odd characters. Like you're down on the boardwalk in Venice and some dude is rolling by in a pink tutu and rollerblades with like an Uncle Sam hat on that's 5 feet in the air. And the reason why I laugh and I smirk is because I look at him and I go, he's emotionally free.
I've seen that dude.
There is a dude like that.
Yeah. You've seen the guy, right? Like as soon as the first time I was like, whoa. And I remember just like being overcome with joy in a sense of seeing him be so free. And he really knows how to skate, right? Like, you know, he's not a poser, but he just knows who he is. Like this is his thing. This is what he wants to experience. People like that. And the other people that make me laugh are people who fall. Like I will literally fall on the floor. If somebody's walking out of like Air One or Whole Foods and they trip over something and you see their groceries fly in the air and everything comes crashing down, I will help them up, but I'm literally laughing at them the entire time. Like I can't help it.
That's
then
me, and I'd be laughing at myself.
And the last thing that makes me laugh are comedians that look at things in society that don't work and are willing to talk about the stuff that's obvious to all of us, but we're not allowed to talk about publicly. Those guys really make me laugh.
That's great. Okay, so question number 2 is, who was your biggest spiritual influence?
I'd probably have to say Milton Hershey. And the reason why I say that is that the school had what was called a merit system. And I didn't like the merit system. But the merit system always revealed to you how you were aligned to your day, right? So we got a merit for our behavior. We got a positive merit for how we were clothed. We got a positive merit for our cleanliness. We got a positive merit for our chore. And we got a positive merit for something else. Well, your house parent at the end of the day judged you, right? And gave you checks or they gave you circles. And that merit system allowed me to know how people were interpreting how I was behaving, because they looked at everything. And I think when you're confronted with that at 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, it has an effect on you. And I look at spirit, I think everything is spiritual. But Milton Hershey had me for 10 years. I was in that program. And I think that that's what has allowed me to flourish in the world and to be universal and to love everyone, regardless of color, creed, nationality, financial position. Because at the school that I went to, we had all flavors of everything all the time. And these were my brothers and my sisters. And so I think that helped me the most. When you can love, when you have love for everyone, then you're free to do everything that you want in the world, because nothing can hold you back when you have love. And Milton Hershey gave that to me.
What would be your advice to people on how to transcend fear?
Well, I think the very first step of anyone wanting to transcend a fear, you have to out yourself and you have to tell someone what you're fearful of. And simply by naming it, that fear no longer controls you. It no longer has a hold of you because it's been outed and recognized by the world, right? Where 2 or more are gathered, I am there. Meaning the presence is there. And so if I have a fear of heights and I tell you I have a fear of heights, just by telling you, I also now have less of a fear of heights because I have less of a fear of your judgment about my fear of a height. So I'm no longer attached to the outcome of being up at a height. And the more you can inform everyone about your insecurities and your deficiencies, the more transparent, the more honest, the more vulnerable you can become, the less it has a hold of you. And this is where I think talk therapy, to bring it back around, is extremely beneficial. Because if you can talk to your therapist about your fears, about your insecurities, about your limiting beliefs, and about your fears, they can be questioned. And just by questioning them alone, they already begin to change because you've brought someone else in to observe that says, I think this limitation that you have is false. And I'm going to tell you why. And they're going to challenge your fears. And if your fears go unchallenged, they maintain the status quo over you and keep you from exploring the world and becoming, they continue to cause you to be risk averse. And the only way we can grow is if we take a risk. And the only way you're going to take a risk is if you feel comfortable. And the only way you're going to feel comfortable to take a risk is if you share with someone that you trust what your fears are. And I think the very first step to transcending a fear is sharing with someone else that it's a fear. Because honesty is the solution for everything.
And our last question is, what's the best piece of spiritual advice that you've ever been given?
Expectation will always lead you away from the light. And the person who gave that to me was Andre Coveney. Okay. And this would have been 1998. He gave me that piece of advice. I was sitting in the kitchen. We're having a conversation. And he goes, and I was pushing back on him about something that he didn't come through with. And he goes, look, man, expectation will lead you away from the light. Meaning that whatever happens in the moment is what was meant to happen. Okay. When I am arguing with reality, I'm competing with God. And when I compete with God, meaning the universal source, the creator of all things, God is all too willing to allow me to suffer an upset so that the upset gets me to question my perception of what actually has occurred. And so every time that I've been upset about something that's gone on outside of myself, I always revert back to that bit of advice. My expectation is what was leading me away from the actual thing that wanted to be experienced. And so then I pull that back and I go, aha, what is it that wanted to be experienced? The very thing that actually happened. And you have to be okay with that. In fact, you have to be able to find joy in it. Because every human is experiencing exactly what they're here to experience. This is one enormous pool of energy, and everyone's a drop in this ocean of experience. No drop is greater than the other. No drop has any more value than the other. And the things that are occurring are meant to happen. Sometimes the wave is 3 feet high. I wished it was only a foot. Sometimes the wave is 9 feet high. I wished it was only 3. But my house parent, the other piece of advice, I'm going to give you two. His name was Bub Akins, and he was my house parent at Milton Hershey School, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And one day I was polishing the floor in the laundry room, and I said to him, I wish I never came to this school. And he said, Christopher, I want you to go to the substitute parents' bathroom. I want you to pull down your pants and sit on the toilet. And I want you to shit in one hand. And I want you to wish in the other. And I want you to tell me which one fills up faster. And I stopped and I was like, oh, I get it. And I started laughing. And he said, all right, you can go out and play now. Okay, because the things that I wished for were interfering with the thing that was actually happening. And I was being bothered by the fact that I had to polish this floor. Well, obviously, I was supposed to be there polishing that floor. There was no way for me to be somewhere else, because in order for me to be somewhere else, my mom would still have to be alive. In order for my mom to still be alive, she would have had to had different parents and a different stepfather. Well, in order for that to happen, see, everything is connected. Each moment leads to the next. Every experience that you're having is specifically drawn up for you. And the ones that are the most upsetting are the ones that are the most important in every relationship that you have. And so, wish in one hand and shit in the other. Tell me which one fills up faster.
It's such a visual.
Well, imagine being a little boy in like fifth grade. Like how old are you then? 10 or 9 years old? And I have to process that, right? Well, Bub, he gave me a lot of good ones.
Well, the visualization clearly worked because it gave you the message really fast.
Yeah. And those two messages are really the same. They're the ones that have stuck with me the most. And they've helped me every time that I'm bothered by something that's out of my control to shut up, let go, and accept what is. And then when I do that, God, it's so much easier. Like, how many times have you been like at an airport and the flight's canceled? Or the flight's delayed 4 hours and you had dinner plans with your friends? And then you're pissed off at the airline. You're talking harshly to the people that are there helping you. And like, you can do all that, but this plane isn't leaving for another 4 hours. Or you can get out your laptop and get out your phone and you can work on that song that you wanted to work on, or you can find a new book at Barnes and Nobles. You can go get some food, or you can go find a place to stretch or sleep. Like, the world is opening up a new opportunity for you. Take that one. The one that you wanted, it's already gone. It wasn't meant for you ever. So let go. Be with what is.
Christopher, thank you so much for taking 2 hours out of your day. I know how busy you are, but we absolutely appreciate it. For anyone that hasn't already bought the book, Free for Life, you can get it on Amazon, or you can also get the audiobook version through your website, which is True Body Intelligence. Sorry, I don't know why I've got a frog in my throat. truebodyintelligence.com. I will have all the links to Christopher's social media website, Dr. Yoon, in the description below so people can find whoever it is they're looking for. And thank you so much for doing this with me. And so coming up, everyone, next Monday, 2 weeks from today, on the 17th, we have Amanda Ellis joining us. We're both very excited about that. And we hope to have you back at some point, Christopher, and we can delve a little bit deeper and see what else we can uncover.
Oh, wonderful. Hey, it was great being here. Thank you for doing the work that you do in the world. It's so important. You know, you're servants and you're doing such a great job. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here to share.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye.